On the morning of September 14th, 1996, Walter Kincaid buttoned his faded work shirt, poured coffee into a chipped thermos, and kissed his wife, Dorothy, on the forehead. He was 60, still broad across the shoulders from hay seasons that never seemed to end. He told her he was taking the farmel down to the back 40 to check the irrigation pond while the pumps were quiet. The drought had been creeping all summer. By noon the wind turned mean, the sky the color of old tin. By sunset, when the cattle bawled at dry troughs and the sprinklers sat useless in the brittle fields, Dorothy called their nearest neighbor. By midnight, headlights and flashlights combed the property. Boots pressed the dust, and dogs picked up nothing. No tractor tracks, no footprint, no scuff on the pond bank. Sheriff's deputies wrote it up as a voluntary missing person. Sometimes a man just walks, someone told Dorothy at church. She did not answer. She went home, folded Walter's shirts, and kept the porch light burning. 15 years later, the worst summer since the Dust Bowl baked Kincaid land until it cracked like cookware left too long on a burner. The old irrigation pond that never went below a green scum was now a dish of fissured silt, a spiderweb of dryness that swallowed the light without reflection. Their granddaughter, Emma, parked her pickup at the fence and walked down for a look because it felt like a thing a person did in a year like this, bear witness to what the heat took. She tested the surface with her heel. It was crust over emptiness. A flock of grasshoppers lifted and clattered away. The air smelled like hot rope. Halfway across, the ground shifted under her, a thin crack yawning open with a sigh. She stumbled, caught herself, and saw a curve in the mud. White metal rim, rusted red right behind it. That particular red anyone raised on farm catalogs knew without needing the name. She thought disc harrow, buried junk, something chewed by time. Then the angles made sense. Spindle, steering post, the suggestion of a hood nosing into clay. Her heart changed tempo. She backed up slow, pulled her phone, misdialed, hit redial, and listened to the ring burr against her ear until Carl, her father, answered. "Dad," she said, "don't freak out. Just get to the old pond. Now." For minutes later, there are distances you do not honor when a voice you love tells you to hurry. Carl slid his truck sideways at the fence and ran the last yards. He stopped beside her and stared down into the hollow, hands on his hips, chin working like he was chewing a word he didn't want to say. "That's your granddad's farmel," he said. His voice was flat, like a man saying the weather report while the barn burns behind him. They went down together on the cracked surface. The heat had pulled the moisture so brutally the top crust lifted in plates. Carl circled the exposed wheel, knelt, reached toward the mud, and then pulled his hand back, as if he'd touched an invisible fence. "We call Morrison," he said. "We don't touch a thing." Emma saw it before he did, a shape behind the front wheel, a wrong geometry in the mud. She crouched and brushed with 2 fingers. Clay flaked away like old paint and the curve of a skull emerged, brown as walnut shell, eye socket like a dry well. The sound she made wasn't a scream. It was more intimate than that, the exhale at the end of a long-held breath you didn't know you were holding for 15 years. Deputies strung tape that snapped in the hot wind. The county coroner, Dr. Lien Chun, arrived in a dusted sedan and put on her gloves without hurry. A crane came at dusk from 2 counties over, chain ticking as the boom swung, and lifted the farmel with the care of a hand moving a sleeping child. Mud and water poured in sheets. The sun fell behind the line of cottonwoods and the field lights came on with a pop, blue-white circles in the dark. Dorothy stood at the tape, not speaking, her hands quiet at her sides, and watched them bring what was left of her husband into the light. They found a watch first. Timex, metal band corroded but intact, face frozen at 11:49. 25th anniversary, Dorothy said. when they showed it to her. Her voice didn't shake. "I gave him that in 81. He never took it off." Then they found a wallet whose leather remembered what it once held. Outlines of cards and cash like ghosts. They found cloth that was mostly thread. They found bone, articulated and careful. And under the tractor seat, wedged where a hand could find it even if eyes could not, a zip bag of plastic, the cheap kind sold in rolls at the hardware store for storing screws. Inside, folded paper turned the color of weak tea, edges furred from years of water, ink bled and rebled until the letters ran together like dark rain. Dr. Chun photographed everything, then bagged the bag and told them she would attempt to salvage the document with a specialist. "We'll stabilize the paper before we separate the sheets," she said. "Slow is safe." Carl nodded like a man holding the last thin line of himself. Dorothy stared at the plastic he could not touch and whispered, "What did you hide, Walt?" The night answered with generators and insects. If this were someone else's sorrow, if you're listening because you came for a story and found yourself holding your breath with Emma at the pond's edge, pause with us. Stories like this are hard to tell and harder to carry. If you want more true, human stories kept alive without faces, without spectacle, subscribe. It tells the algorithm to stop, to let the quiet matter. And it helps us finish what families like this start. The next morning, the four of them, Dorothy, Carl, Uncle Pete, and Emma, sat in a small conference room off a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Dr. Chun spread photographs and spoke with a gentleness that didn't insult them. "Identity is confirmed by dental records," she said, and Dorothy closed her eyes like a woman hearing and expected him. "The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the occipital bone. A single severe strike from behind. Immediate incapacitation, likely fatal." Carl put both hands on the table. The tendons stood up like cables. "Accident?" he asked. The word sounded ridiculous in the room, but people say ridiculous things when they need to test the shape of the world. Dr. Chun shook her head. "The tractor's damage pattern is inconsistent with rollover. Gears were engaged when it entered. There are signs that the front left was. Forced soil displacement suggests it was pushed. Your father's remains were found beneath the left wheel." Emma looked at the photographs because not looking felt like theft. Bone, ruler, fracture. The clinical square edges of the images made the violence feel stranger, like a diagram of someone else's sadness. "There's more," Dr. Chun said, and turned her laptop so they could see a high-contrast image of the paper photographed through the plastic bag. 3 words punched through the blur. "Soil test results." Below them circled thick, ugly, furious, contaminated, illegal dumping. Pete sat back hard. "Jesus." Carl just looked at Dorothy, and Dorothy's face did something Emma couldn't bear to name. Shapes landed in the old woman's eyes and stayed there. "Sheriff Morrison has been briefed," Dr. Chun said. "We'll dry the document. Carefully. We may be able to retrieve names, numbers, dates." Morrison had been a deputy when Walter went missing. He had been the one who found Dorothy at the kitchen sink the next morning, hands submerged in cold water up to the wrists, as if she could hold herself together if she kept them there. Now he sat across from the family with a notebook open and a coffee he didn't drink. He was heavier around the middle. His eyes looked like someone had sanded them. "We're opening this as a homicide," he said. "We'll need to speak with anyone your father spoke to in the weeks before he disappeared. Anyone he argued with. Anyone knew he had business with." "Mitchell Gaines," Dorothy said immediately. 3 syllables, flat as a slate. "He came to the house 2 nights before Walter vanished. Stood on the porch and told Walt that if he had questions about runoff or storage or temporary placement, he should call the regional office and not go stirring up neighbors. I listened from the dark in the hallway and wanted to break his nose with a skillet. Morrison stopped writing and looked at her. You didn't tell us that in '96. Dorothy breathed in, slow. He came back after. 3 times. With food and a face that knew how to make grief look like company. And she stopped and shook her head once. I let him. I needed to watch the wolf when it came up on the porch. Morrison wrote a word Emma could not see. Mitchell is now regional manager for Heartland Futures. Fertilizer, equipment leases, chemical storage, disposal contracts. They had a minor EPA complaint in '90, settled for a fine. I'll be candid. They have lawyers who know how to make problems into paperwork. Emma pictured the bag under the tractor seat and the words circled like someone had pressed the pen so hard it broke through. He didn't wander, she said. He found something, and someone made sure the pond swallowed it. The drought turned the county into a brittle bowl that month. You could hear the heart in it. Old houses shifting, cedar fence posts giving up the inch they had left, cattle rubbing their ribs on empty troughs. Everything was edges and dust. News traveled through that air faster than moisture ever had. By noon of the day after the coroner's confirmation, a reporter from the Kansas City Star had parked a 2-clean sedan in the Kincaid Drive and stood on the gravel with a notebook and what she called sympathy. Carl told her to leave because grief makes men plain-spoken. But before she shut her car door, she said, "If Heartland Futures was using your land as a pit, the county drinks that water. So do their children." She pushed a card into Emma's palm when Carl turned his back to breathe. On the card she had written, "I've been on Heartland for 2 years. If you find anything you can't carry alone, call." That night, Pete sat at the old kitchen table with a borrowed laptop and anger set to a search engine. He pulled up public records. A fine in a neighboring county for improper disposal. A settlement that looked like a bandage on a bullet wound. Mitigation plans you needed a law degree to read. He cursed at numbers because there were never the right ones. Dorothy moved like a machine in the kitchen, making sandwiches as if grief ate like a farmhand. Carl stood at the sink and looked out at the far pasture as if he expected his father to appear at the fence. Call him a fool and tell him to quit crying. "I watched him change in August of '96, Dorothy said, finally sitting. He started locking gates at sundown like someone had left the pens open. He took soil samples and didn't take them to the extension office because he said he didn't trust anyone who'd ever shared a coffee with a county commissioner. He had a black pocket notebook he wrote in like a priest writing confessions. And when I asked him what he thought he'd found, he said, 'I think it's in the water. And if it's in the water, it's in the babies.' Then he wouldn't say another word." Emma didn't remember her grandfather's voice. What she remembered was a porch light that never went off and the shape a man's absence makes in a family. How it settles in chairs and cupboards and the way people laugh. Morrison worked the case like a man sweeping corn out of a bin. Methodical, stubborn, resigned to dust in the eyes. He pulled Walter's old mailbox number from storage and found 2 letters mailed in early September to an environmental lab in Kansas City. Both from W. Kincaid. Both with the words "rush results requested." He subpoenaed the lab. The lab said the paperwork had been microfilmed and sent to Archive Upstate when they moved buildings in '02. He drove there himself because he did not trust the mail with ghosts. The boxes smelled like old glue and library air. He brought the microfilm back and set it up in a machine that made a low whir like a tired fly. Numbers scrolled. He slowed. There were dates. There were coordinates. There was a report with letters that made Pete swear again. Chlorinated solvents, organochlorine pesticides, 3 compounds whose names sounded like spells and cancer both. Was there dumping? Morrison asked the chemist on the lab's number when the man finally called back. The chemist used careful words because careful words keep people from being sued. Concentrations were inconsistent with background. The pattern suggested a point source. If I had seen this, I would have recommended immediate site investigation and notification to the county. Did you see it? I didn't. I was in training that week. A temporary technician signed that report. I'm sorry. Dr. Chen's paper slowly gave up its writing under dry air and patient hands. There were maps sketched in Walter's clean, block-letter hand. There were lists of nights he'd seen trucks on the old service lane, their lights turned off a quarter-mile early. There was a column labeled Children Sick, with notes that made Dorothy sit down. Gaines boy skin rash. Larkin baby hospital for breathing. Names. Dates. A line of arithmetic that added volumes in the margin and then underlined the sum 3 times until the paper almost tore. And on the last page, a sentence alone. If I'm gone. Tell Morrison to check the north fence gate on a moonless night. They won't use the main road. They watched the gate the following Friday with 2 unmarked cars and the kind of quiet that turns minutes into tight wire. The moon didn't bother to rise. At 1:22 a.m., a pair of headlights appeared and then went dark. The rumble remained. A truck bounced along the back lane, a tail light out. It stopped at the gate. 2 men got out and moved like people who had keys to locks they shouldn't. They said nothing. One of them carried a thick, dark hose, the kind used to move liquid where it didn't want to go. He hung it over the fence like a snake. The other turned a valve. There is a sound liquid makes when gravity steals it. Morrison heard it and felt his chest get tight. He spoke into the radio he held small in his hand. Now, he said, there are arrests that make noise and arrests that pass like a cloud over a field. This one tried to be quiet but couldn't. One man ran and fell hard. The other put up both hands like he had been practicing since 1990. The truck's tank smelled like a memory Pete couldn't place until later when his head stopped buzzing. Like a half-cleaned brush shed in July. Like solvent and old seed bags and something sweet that made your teeth feel tired. The tank's placard number matched the kind used for non-hazardous agricultural byproduct. The liquid inside tested like a lie. The men worked for a subcontractor. The subcontractor worked for Heartland Futures. The paper contracts separated like oil on water. The words rogue employees appeared in statements drafted by lawyers whose suits cost more than 10 good steers. Mitchell Gaines issued a press release by noon saying he was shocked to learn of troubling allegations and would cooperate fully with authorities. That afternoon he texted Morrison. Can we talk off the record? Morrison turned his phone face down on his desk and said nothing to it until the urge passed. If stories like this matter to you, ordinary people against systems designed to keep truth quiet, tap subscribe and turn on the bell. It's not about a number on a dashboard. It's about telling platforms that attention belongs to real families and real towns and the people who refuse to look away. Share the stories that help communities breathe. Dorothy went to church the next Sunday and sat in the second pew where she always sat. When the hymn started, she did not sing. After the service, Mitchell's wife tried to hug her. Dorothy put out her hand and took the woman's elbow instead. The way nurses do with patients who are about to faint. Take care of your grandchildren, she said. Make sure they drink bottled for a while. The woman's eyes filled and made her mascara crack. I didn't know, she whispered. Dorothy nodded once. A lot of us didn't. That's the point. The county commissioners called an emergency session that week. The room smelled like hot wool and paper. People stood in the back because the chairs filled in 10 minutes. A state environmental investigator with rolled shirt sleeves spoke for 40 minutes and said words like remediation and plume and litigation. Morrison spoke for 5 minutes and said, I watched 2 men drain a truck through a fence onto land that feeds your wells. And I pulled a notebook from a bag under a tractor seat where a dead man wanted his wife to find it. I'm tired and I'm angry and I don't care who sees it. A little girl in the back stood on a chair to see. Emma looked at her and thought about the column Walter had labeled, "Children Sick." The girl's mother put a hand on her shoulder and guided it down like calm on a horse's neck. Reporters came out of the woodwork and the motel ran out of clean towels. The Star ran a Sunday feature with a photograph of the pond the morning after the tractor came out. Dark ring on the bank like an old bruise and 4 figures behind the tape. Their faces turned away because some grief feels indecent if you show it uninvited. A national outlet called it Small-Town Aaron Brockovich. And Dorothy snorted at the way city people need film to feel a thing. Charges take their time in places where the courthouse has steps worn hollow by boots. The subcontractor pled to illegal disposal and named a supervisor who named a regional manager who said he had never given such orders, and if anything untoward occurred it was the fault of overzealous men misunderstanding perfectly legal direction to deliver washdown water to an approved retention area. Heartland Future's general counsel wrote letters to the editor about the importance of modern agriculture. Grain prices didn't care. Rain came late. The pond filled slow as if ashamed to. You learn while you wait for court that silence has shapes. There is the silence of a barn before dawn, the animals listening for your step. There is the silence of a hospital hallway at 3 a.m., monitors soft, a late coffee gone cold in your hand. There is the silence of a kitchen at 11:47 p.m., the exact minute a watch stopped in a pond. When a widow stands under the light she forgot to turn off and reads a line in her husband's hand that says, "If I'm gone, do this." The civil case started the following spring. The county partnered with the state and the EPA and a law firm that didn't come cheap but smelled blood in the water, and odds on a settlement that would keep their junior associates in pelotons for a year. Discovery peeled back memos from the mid-90s that spoke in a language Dorothy did not understand but recognized as cowardice. Externalization, liability, discretionary guidance, discretionary disposal, discretionary conscience. Emma highlighted lines until the PDF looked like a field of mustard in bloom. When Dorothy took the stand, the courtroom stood without meaning to. Old men removed hats. Boys who had never met Walter put their hands flat on their thighs to keep them from fidgeting. Dorothy said, "He was a stubborn man. He was fair, not nice. He kept receipts and grudges in the same drawer. He loved the taste of cold well water more than he loved dessert. And when he understood that the water he loved might be killing babies, he wrote it down and he hid it where men who wanted to make things disappear could not find it unless they found him. I suppose they thought the pond was good at keeping secrets. It kept his for 15 years, but it kept theirs too." Pete testified, and his hands shook when he said the long words. Carl testified, and his voice went rough when the lawyer asked him what it felt like to see the watch. Emma testified, and she did not try to make herself sound like anything other than a woman who had brushed a skull with her fingertips because she didn't know yet that the right thing and the hard thing are often the same. Mitchell Gaines did not testify that week. He sat with his hands folded and watched the proceedings as if they were weather he couldn't change. That afternoon, a picture surfaced from 1996. A barbecue at the Gaines place, long table, red check cloth, men in seed caps, the sheriff at the time smiling with sauce on his chin. Walter was not in that picture. Dorothy looked at it and felt something unclench, a small thing like a knuckle popping. "I was right not to trust," she said, "not to anyone in particular." The criminal case for Walter's death stalled on an absence, as those cases do when the men who make phone calls never touch the valve. The two arrested at the fence. One turned and sang, and the other kept his mouth hard as a shut feed bin. There was talk of accessory charges. There were whispers about a third man who had since moved south and opened a dealership for small engines. There was a rumor about a crowbar that never materialized and a rumor about a confession recorded on a tape that turned out to be lake noise. Morrison worked it until he knew where every dirt road went at midnight. He did not retire when he planned to. He got quieter, which is not the same thing as softer. Remediation crews came in spring with backhoes and white suits that made them look like spare teeth. They cut away soil in clean, ashamed layers. They installed wells to listen to water. They built a treatment skid on the edge of a pasture where calves chewed without judgment. The sound of pumps and fans joined the wind and the meadowlarks and the long, low grumble of trains that thought they were far enough away not to matter. The water came cleaner by inches. That is a kind of miracle, even if it makes no good television. Emma took a job full-time at the county extension office that summer. She learned to say words like parts per billion without sounding like she wanted to throw a wrench. She went to kitchens where women who had lived long enough to bury brothers showed her brown water in jars and asked whether making coffee with it would hurt anyone. She taught a class on private well testing the first Tuesday of every month and watched shy men put their names on the clipboard like they were confessing to weakness. She told them about Walter without saying his name, about what it costs to pay attention, about the inventory good men take when the math of a place stops adding up. Dorothy's porch light went off the week they turned the pump on. She stood at the switch for a long moment, her finger hovering, like a nurse hovering over a morphine button. When she touched it, the house went a little darker and a little truer. That night she slept through to morning for the first time since '96. She woke to the sound of the kitchen clock and thought for a second that it was the old Timex, ticking on the nightstand, before memory set its weight on the bed beside her. In October, on a morning with a sky the color of new denim, they buried Walter for the second time. The first burial had been the kind grief makes, a service without a body, a casserole line. This one was quiet and close. They put him beside his father. A cottonwood leaf let go and landed on the lid. Dorothy did not cry until she saw the watch on the table at the church after, lying beside a photograph of a man in a hat who squinted at the camera like he'd been interrupted while doing something important. She picked up the watch and put it on her wrist. It slid and dangled. "It's heavy," she said. "Good." She didn't wind it. Some things you do not ask to start again. Heartland Futures paid a settlement large enough that the county built a water tower with an unlovely new name and a scholarship fund for kids who wanted to study things with electrons in them. They paid for wells and new pipe and glossy pamphlets that said community partnership on the cover. They did not admit guilt. Their general counsel retired early. Mitchell moved 2 counties over, then came back 6 months later and sat in the last pew at church with his head down. People have a way of becoming smaller when the thing they rode runs out of road. The man who swung the hose pled and got 5 to 8. He wrote a letter to Morrison from the state prison that started with "Sir" and ended with, "I didn't mean no harm to no babies." Morrison read it twice and then put it in a file and then, after thinking about it for 4 days, took it out and drove it to Dorothy. She read it standing at the kitchen sink with her hands under the cold water again like she was 15 minutes from a storm, and the only thing that would save the house was her wrists. "You can't jail a company," she said. "You can only jail the men it pays to do the part that leaves fingerprints." A year later, the pond was full. It had the look water gets when it's been ill and is learning to be itself again. Skittish, shy, unwilling to trust light. Carl put a gate across the service lane and a lock on it that made a deep, satisfying click. Pete planted natives along the banks because the extension bulletin said roots hold secrets in place. Emma came sometimes at dusk and sat with her boots in the dust and listened for the sound of a watch that didn't tick. She thought about moments when time freezes and then resumes, how you measure life between one and the other. On the anniversary of the night the crane lifted the farmal out, Dorothy cooked supper for the family. She set the table early, the way she always had, then stood at the counter and folded the dish towel into a neat square and unfolded it and folded it again. "He wasn't a saint," she said to Emma without preface when the younger woman came in with tomatoes. "He could be sharp. He was cheap about foolish things and generous about the ones that counted." He would have hated that people know his name because of this. But he would have loved that the water is clean. She smiled a small, private smile. And he would have loved that Mitchell had to sit through my testimony. They ate. They cleared plates. They went out on the porch because the night was the kind people in cities dream about. The stars had that rural cruelty, so many they make wishes feel like an insult. A train breathed somewhere to the east. A canning lid pinged in the kitchen as it cooled. Emma said, "Do you ever think about selling?" Carl said, "No." Dorothy said, "I'll die in that bed." Pete said nothing, which was his way of agreeing. The lawsuit money built a new roof on the school and replaced pipes under Main Street and covered the first year of testing for anyone who wanted it. People argued in the grocery about who knew what when and whether anger was a useful fuel. The county paper ran a story about healing. Dorothy folded it and put it under the basket with the extra napkins. Healing is a word for people who haven't done it yet, she thought. The rest of us just live. When Morrison finally retired, the paper wrote, "Sheriff who solved Kincaid case hangs up badge. He corrected no one because solved is a word that lets people sleep and he was tired enough to permit it." He kept a copy of Walter's map on his den wall. Sometimes he traced the arrow to the north gate with his finger and felt the old bone-deep satisfaction of plans that work because a man you wish you had known thought ahead. Emma married a man from 2 counties over who had a laugh that sounded like whined through a cottonwood. They had a little boy first and then a girl. The girl loved the taste of cold well water and the feel of silt between her toes. When she was 5, she asked why the gate at the back lane had a lock. Emma crouched and tied the girl's shoe and said, "Because some things need keeping out." She did not say that some things always find a way, but she thought it. Then she stood and took her daughter's hand and walked her down to the pond and told her the story with most of the hard parts at the edges and the main part in the middle. How her great-grandfather had paid attention and it cost him, and then it saved people he never met. On a winter morning a few years after that, Emma stopped at the cemetery on her way into town. The sky was a hard white lid. Her breath made a small weather in front of her. She stood in front of the stone with the name she had spoken more often in the last decade than in the first 15 years of her life and put her fingers on the carved K like it might give under pressure. "We kept going," she said. "The pumps run. The water tests clean. The county passed an ordinance about disposal that has teeth." She smiled. "Grandma says you wouldn't like the name they put on the water tower, but that you'd be pleased every time you turned on a tap and smelled nothing." She paused. "I think you'd be proud of us. I think you'd be mad it took this long. Both can be true." She turned to go and then turned back and said the thing she had not said out loud yet. "I'm pregnant," she said. "Don't make me weird about that. I want to be happy without holding my breath." The wind moved a gate chain against a post and made a sound like a small bell. It was enough. At home, a brown envelope leaned against her door. Return address from the state prison. She took it inside and opened it with a butter knife because she couldn't bear to use anything sharper. Inside, a letter from the man who had carried the hose that night. His handwriting leaned forward like a man walking into wind. "Ma'am, I know I got no right to ask you to read this, but I am writing because a preacher came through and said confession ain't for him, it's for the person speaking, and I got tired of carrying this. I done what I did because a man told me it was wash water and not to ask, and I wanted the overtime. I didn't know about your granddad then. I know now. I got a daughter. I can't take back what I done, but I can tell you I ain't never gonna do nothing again I can't put my name on. I am sorry as a man can be sorry. You don't owe me nothing. J." Emma folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the good dish towels. Next to the watch Dorothy had given her the day she decided her wrists were tired. She didn't forgive the man. Forgiveness is a story people write when they want the last page to be neat. She did something else. She laid the letter beside the map and the watch and the water test results and the photograph of Walter squinting, and she let it sit there with the rest of it Another object in the drawer of life you open when you need to remember everything, not just the parts that make you feel good. Years later, a boy named for no one in particular finished a school project on local history and read aloud to a class with plastic chairs about a farmer who didn't go away so much as he went under and then came back, about a family who turned a pond into a witness stand, about a county that learned how to say no in the language companies understand. His teacher blinked twice in quick succession and said, "Very good, James." A girl in the second row raised her hand and asked, "Is the water safe now?" The boy said, "Mostly," because he had been raised by people who disliked lies even when they wore nice clothes. Then he added, "We check," because that was the part his mother had taught him was the important one. On the 25th anniversary of the day the tractor came out of the pond, Dorothy sat on the porch and put the watch on her wrist one last time. She had become thin and exact, like a pencil used to the ferrule. Emma sat beside her. The evening smelled like cut alfalfa. "He never asked to be a lesson," Dorothy said. "But he makes a good one." She touched the watch face. "He would say right here, 'All right, that's enough talk about me. Go check the gate.'" She laughed, and the laugh surprised both of them. "Go check the gate," she said again, softer. Emma stood and did as she was told. The gate was closed. The lock was new again, because Carl liked to buy a new one every spring. The pasture lay still on the far side. The cottonwoods held their leaves like they knew a wind was coming but didn't know when. The pond caught the last light and gave it back in a thin line that looked like a promise you keep not by speaking it but by showing up. At the kitchen table, the map lay unfolded. It had gone soft at the creases with years of being opened and closed and traced and taught. There were coffee rings where someone had set a mug down on the corner by accident the day they explained to a teenager why chemistry mattered. There was a thumbprint in the lower margin, grease or dirt or history. There was a note in Walter's steady hand, the one that had told Dorothy how to find everything that mattered after he was gone. Said, "Start here." So they did, and they kept doing it. That's the story. If you're still with us, if you felt Emma's breath leave her when the mud gave up bone, or Dorothy's back straighten under years that finally had a shape, or Morrison's jaw set when the gate chain rattled, know this: the way we keep stories like this from being swallowed is simple. We tell them. We subscribe. We share. We make sure that when someone tries to turn truth into paperwork, there's a family and a county and a stubborn audience waiting up with the porch light on. And at the edge of a field in a county most maps barely name, a pond holds the sky like a mirror that remembers everything it once kept quiet. On still mornings, if you stand at the fence and listen, you can almost hear a watch that doesn't tick, and a woman in a kitchen turning off a porch light at last. You can hear a gate close. You can hear water doing what water does when people stop lying to it. It runs clear.